Hi, I'm Cameron Campbell, and I'll be presenting the introduction.
I'm Daniel Bourget, and I'll be presenting Functionalism.
I'm Max Gross, and I'll be presenting conflict theory.
I'm Richard Buchar, and will be presenting symbolic interactionism.
I'm Nico Geddes, and I will be presenting the critical assessment.
In January 2019, Lauren Gunter, columnist for the Edmonton Sun, published an editorial entitled Gillette, Morally Superior to the Rest of Us, in response to a brand new ad campaign run by Gillette, a popular razor and blade distributor. To understand the premise of the article, some historical context is crucial. The popular razor and blade producing company Gillette aired its first The Best a Man Can Get campaign during the National Football League's 23rd Super Bowl hosted in January 1989, which will remain their slogan and central idea of campaigning still to this day. On January 13th, 2019, Gillette published the brand new ad campaign that's involved, entitled We Believe the Best Man Can Be, depicting toxic behaviors that males have taken part in for years and how the gender as a whole could do better to stop them. These behaviors were consistent with issues brought forward by the now popular Me Too movement, which is a non-for-profit organization and social movement whose goal is to help victims of sexual harassment and assault. Although this shows the social activity level that Gillette is exerting, the ad campaign fails to take into account that the fact that the majority of Gillette's product line is specifically tailored for men, and many feel as if the new ads question their integrity simply because they are male. The author of the article, Gunter, begins by arguing so. He claims that the ad implies that even he himself, along with all other male counterparts, are to blame for moral acts simply because they are male. Gunter explains that they are simply trying to get their target audience to change the way that they act by blaming them for the very issue. Next, Gunter then criticizes what he calls activists, those who like these being male equals being wrong ads. He states that in the present day it's very easy to simply go along with the progressive mindset, as is typically the most accepted among society, saying it is popular to be politically correct, and most of the time you will typically receive praise for it. Meanwhile, those who go against it are slandered. Gunter even states that these ads are a branch of the Me Too movement, and activists in these movements tend to get very carried away very easily. He then concludes the column by expressing his opinion that most men are not bad, violent, or abusive, but Gillette implies that the whole sex is the problem, instead of accepting his belief that there are simply bad individuals. As a whole, Gunter expresses his opinion that these recent Gillette ads have seriously questioned the morals and the integrity of men everywhere for no reason at all. He claims that the blame should not be put on the males as a whole, but instead individuals. He believes that Gillette should simply stick with razors and suggests that they are simply being bold. But Gunter does not see the ads as courageous at all.
Gunter's tone in his editorial are very consistent with functionalist theory, but the issues within Gillette's advertisement are not. One highlight of the editorial in Functionalism in relation to the issues in the advertisements are first when Gunter says, "Repent, you sinners, or face the wrath of," in this case, the wrath of political correctness. This is consistent with Functionalism in relation to socialization, because socialization through Functionalism occurs when people's personalities and attitudes are molded to behave like a group and or culture. Gunter is implying that Gillette's advertisement is attempting to convey the message that his behavior does not align with this group, and he should repent in order to change his attitudes and behaviors, altering his beliefs to be socialized into this group mentality. Gunter also states that the majority of men are not bad, violent people, or abusers. This is consistent with functionalism because the theory dictates that if something remains in society for long periods of time, it must serve a purpose to the betterment of said society. The fact that some people with these characteristics exist and have persisted through time suggests that they must serve a purpose to society. Gunter also states that Gillette's advertisement sends the message that being male is equal to being wrong. Sidney Brown, who made a video regarding functionalism, asserts that social facts exist because of their individuality and inability to be influenced by any person. One social fact correlated with Gunter's statement is moral regulations. Deeming all males as being wrong would violate this social fact because it is established within society that not all males are wrong, and to advocate against this would devalue the moral status of man within our society, leading to an inconsistency with functionalism. The issues brought up in the video can all relate to current dysfunctions in society. For instance, the StatsCan graphs presented in the Week 7 PowerPoint slides by Dr. Knowles demonstrate that 16% of families have a single parent, women are working paying jobs more often but performing a majority of household duties, and some men are choosing to be stay-at-home dads. All of these points refer to dysfunctions in society. If the majority of people view them as dysfunctions, over time the issues brought up will correct themselves, creating a shift in society that will bring the institutions and social facts back to equilibrium.
Hello, my name is Max. So conflict theory perspective on sociology assumes that society is always in a state of conflict between groups. The conflict perspective explains various aspects of our social world by looking at which groups have power and therefore benefit from a social arrangement. Based on this, Gunter's editorial disagrees with conflict theory, although when doing so he proves that conflict theory is prevalent in society and therefore is consistent with conflict theory. He is consistent in the fact that he realizes that Gillette's ad follows closely with the conflict theory perspective, but he does not agree with this ideology, and therefore he attempts to demonstrate that this is an ill way of viewing society. Gunter speaks as though conflict theory is a bad way to view society, which demonstrates his inconsistency with conflict theory perspective. Let's look at how this is inconsistent first. The conflict theory perspective on gender inequality suggests that that society is a struggle for dominance among social groups that compete for scarce resources. When sociologists examine gender from this perspective, we can view men as the dominant group and women as a subordinate group. This does not coincide with Gunter's editorial because he thinks that most men aren't bad, most men aren't abusive or violent, just as most whites or non-indigenous people aren't racist or colonizers. To further dig himself into a hole, he also agrees that there is a problem with bullying and domestic abuse, which would assume that there are two groups, as Gunter clearly states that there is an antithesis. But he does not mention that there are two groups in his editorial. He thinks that it is just a few bad men. Now, the editorial is consistent as Gunter mentions that Gillette's ad uses blame and shame tactics, which are a forceful way to create a synthesis. Therefore, they are attempting to make a synthesis so that we can assume that there must also be an antithesis, because if there was no problem, then why would there be a need for a solution? Gunter later mentions that he views the Me Too movement as a revolution, and Gillette as an outgrowth of this. Revolutions are a big part of conflict theory perspective. Therefore, we can consider this part consistent with conflict theory. From this, we can concur that the editorial and conflict theory are in a fluxed state.
Symbolic interactionism defines symbols as something that stands for or represents something else. These symbols have meaning to a group of people or to an individual, but that meaning can change either through interaction or through experience. Within Gunter's article, we find that he is both consistent and inconsistent with regards to symbolic interactionism. First, Gunter asserts that Gillette's advertisement projects the message that masculinity is toxic and that men are viewed as bad people, but his tone remains unchanged from this, which is found to be inconsistent with the looking glass self-concept. On the other hand, Gunter is found to be consistent when it comes to the generalized others concept, as he implies he is blamed for social issues in society just because he is a man. This remains true because society and Gillette have created this bias towards men from only an idea, from either experience, or from observation of a few bad individuals. Finally, he does not remain consistent when it comes to the concept of a symbol changing. This is demonstrated when he states that most men aren't bad and discusses toxic masculinity almost as a made-up issue. He is inconsistent because he does not acknowledge the change but instead fights it. As he states, most men aren't bad. Although that may be the case, the idea and symbol of a man is changing. A study by Stats Canada shows us that as time goes on, men and women are beginning to share household chores and gender roles are blurring together. This study shows, since 1968, men's involvement in the household has increased by 14%. To conclude, Gunter's article is consistent and inconsistent, but overall, the theory weakens Gunter's reasoning.
Mr. Gunter's article is primarily a one-sided view with a narrow focus that fails to discuss the underlying issue in any meaningful way. It appears that Mr. Gunter's prime motivation is to express his outrage that the ad was ever made, that he finds it personally offensive, and that it may not even be effective as a marketing tool. Gunter does not make any logical, well-supported arguments in his article. Instead, he relies primarily on using emotional outbursts to express his view and to urge the reader to agree with his opinion. Also, a number of fallacies and contradictions in the article make it difficult for the reader to logically support his point of view. He sets the tone at the very start of the article by telling a story that really has no relevance to his theme. He relies on the catchy phrase of damned if you do, damned if you don't, to appeal to ignorance and emotion in support of the rest of his article. This also sets the tone of him being trapped and somehow the victim of something. He then goes on to use various other emotionally loaded terms to sway the reader's opinions rather than using logical arguments. Throughout the article, Gunter attacks the messengers rather than the message by comparing them to preachers from the pulpit and referring to them as the social media mob. He also makes a number of hasty generalizations that he does not adequately support with any relevant or credible evidence. There are also certain contradictions and illogical conclusions in the presentation of his views. First, he argues that he doesn't see the ad as courageous even after he had just finished implying that there may be a large potential financial benefit. Secondly, while on one hand he condemns the social media mob for being activists in favor of the ad's message, he then relies on the same social media to support his view that they are the campaigns against the ad. Perhaps most important of all, Gunter does not present or even try to explore the possibility of another side to the argument or a differing interpretation to the ad. For example, he makes no mention of the fact that Gillette's owners, Procter & Gamble, have had a history of addressing various social issues and supporting social movements through their advertising. Also, although he discusses the campaign against the ad, he makes no mention of the support the ad has received, including from celebrities and prominent individuals. Finally, if Gunter, as he states, is not in favor of bullying, sexual harassment, or domestic violence, then why is he so offended? One would logically conclude that he should applaud the ad for encouraging men to be more like him. In conclusion, Gunter's editorial offers no logical argument to persuade the reader that the ad is simply misdirected and offensive. Instead, the article is narrow-minded opinion that is not adequately supported by logic and which fails to present or even consider an alternate view of the ad's purpose or potential impact. It relies on its aggressiveness and highly charged and biased emotional tone to persuade the reader. Therefore, it is not an effective article for a meaningful discussion of the ad and the underlying issue, but comes off as a biased, angry rant against social movements and activism.